Well, welcome to the 700 Club. One of the worst dictatorships in the Middle East no longer exists. The Assad family ruled Syria with a brutal hand for over half a century, and today Syria is free of their grip.
A coalition of Islamic rebels marched across the country and took the capital in less than 2 weeks. Now Israel and the world are watching to see what comes next. Paul Strand reports from Jerusalem.
Syria's streets are filled with jubilation as its people celebrate the overthrow of the dictatorial Assad regime.
Assad is gone. Thank God. Thank God.
Assad and his father ruled Syria with an iron fist for more than 5 decades. The notorious prisons where the Assad regime tortured and often murdered hundreds of thousands of dissidents have now been emptied. The deposed leader, Bashar al-Assad, is in Moscow with his family, reportedly receiving asylum from his ally. The nearly 14-year civil war was suddenly capped by a sprawling coalition of Islamic rebels racing across Syria in a 2-week sprint to capture Damascus. The main rebel group is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known as HTS. Its leader started out with Syria's version of al-Qaeda and still has a $10 million bounty on its head from the U.S.
Some of the rebel groups that took down Assad have their own grim record of terrorism and human rights abuses.
We could have an Islamic State arise there, which will have profound negative implications across the region.
While many of HTS's factions seem to have moderated, and most of the rebel groups are pledging to protect Syria's religious and ethnic minorities, Biden is wary.
They're saying the right things now, but as they take on greater responsibility, we will assess not just their words, but their actions.
Some 900 U.S. troops remain in eastern Syria. Their mission is countering the brutal terrorists of ISIS.
We're clear-eyed about the fact that ISIS will try to take advantage of any vacuum.
It's been a long civil war marked by Assad committing atrocities like using chemical weapons on his own people. Major ally Russia often joined in, its jets bombing Syrian civilians. Iran and its main proxy Hezbollah also took part in slaughtering rebels. In this latest fight, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah didn't come to Assad's rescue as in the past. Russia's attention is mostly on its war with Ukraine. Israel's dismantling of Hezbollah and weakening of Iran played a major role in keeping them from saving Assad. President-elect Trump piled on, writing, Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now, one because of Ukraine and a bad economy, the other because of Israel and its fighting success. As for Syrian and Israeli relations, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is offering peace.
We send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Jews, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel.
Still, the IDF rushed to take over the buffer zone around the much-disputed Golan Heights between Israel and Syria. It also struck chemical weapon sites and long-range rockets to keep them from falling into the wrong hands. Netanyahu says Israel will do whatever is necessary to protect itself.
To ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, Jonathan Conricus is a former IDF spokesman and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. He joins us now from Los Angeles. So, Jonathan, how did Israel's military successes against Hezbollah lead to the overthrow of Assad?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me. I think it goes a bit beyond that even, and I think we have to go back to October 7. The murderous massacre of Jews at the hands of Hamas. That was really the first domino. That was the first Iranian proxy that attacked Israel. Hezbollah followed suit on October 8th, and that started that two-front war. A year and 2 months after that, both those two organizations, both Iranian proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, are either destroyed or significantly weakened. And in a Lebanese perspective, that is what paved the way for events to happen in Syria, because there was very little fighting power to come to the help of Bashar al-Assad once the rebels started moving. So a chain of events that I'm sure that the Iranians did not foresee, and they perhaps thought that they would be able to defeat the state of Israel and that Israel was weak. What is apparent 14 months after is that Israel is not only not weak, it is strong, it's focused, and it is now trying to make the best of a very dynamic situation in Syria.
Well, Israel has now moved into sort of a buffer zone at the Golan Heights. They took out some chemical weapons stockpiles to make sure it wouldn't fall into the hands of the rebels. The U.S. Central Command, I think in the first time that I'm aware of it, issued a press release talking about targeting 75 different locations in Syria with Air Force weapons, B-52s, and fighter jets. In all of that, what's the risk to either Israel or to peace in the Middle East from these rebel groups? It seems that the U.S. is taking it very seriously. To hit 75 different targets in a single day is monumental. What's the risk here?
Yeah, the risk is actually quite substantial, and the risk emanates from the country of Turkey. Turkey has imperialistic designs, and if Turkey makes a move into Syria and starts taking Syrian terrain, I see that as a significant risk for regional stability. Moreover, the issue of if there's chaos and total anarchy in Syria, which currently doesn't seem to be the situation, but if it spirals into chaos and anarchy, that of course will be dangerous for Israel. You mentioned the issue of the proliferation of chemical and strategic weapons. That's at the top of the list. And again, what Israel is doing is really at the benefit of the entire world, because Israel is taking off from the market special weapons that I'm sure all of the terrorists around the world are very eager to get their hands on. And now that the Syrian regime doesn't control them, the best option is simply to destroy them. And Israel did that yesterday, and I think Israel will continue to do so today and tomorrow. There's also, last thing, a significant threat here towards Jordan. Jordan is an important Western ally. It shares a long border with Israel, and that country is under duress, internal pressure and instability with a restive Palestinian population. And instability in Syria may spill over into Jordan. And if that happens, that is not a good thing for regional stability for the U.S. or for Israel. And all of these topics are monitored, and I think that Israeli and American decision makers are aware of it. There are opportunities here, and this is probably inherently a good thing that's happening, that Iran and Russia have lost their asset in Syria, and that Iran cannot supply weapons to Hezbollah, and they cannot reach Lebanon. That's a very good thing that will have long-term positive ramifications for the region. But so far, it's still too early to say where this is going. Israel is watching this very vigilantly, massive troop supports on the Golan Heights and sending very strong messages to the rebels. Don't even think about turning your barrels towards the west, because if you do, you will meet a very strong and resolute Israeli response.
Let's talk about Turkey. How likely do you think they'll just annex the Kurdish region of Syria? They have sort of de facto military control of it already. Is that a likely outcome here?
I think it is. And I think that the Turkish designs here are to try to how should we say, annihilate or to dismember the Kurdish forces in northeastern northeastern Syria. By the way, these forces are loyal to the U.S. and have been supporting U.S. counter-ISIS operations very effectively. They're also the ones that are keeping a lot of ISIS terrorists in jail. And I think that the Turkish have long-term designs to try to get rid of them and to exert their influence on northern Syria. And I'm not sure that they would stop with northern Syria. When you listen to statements and when you look at Turkish state media, it is rife with very imperialistic videos and motifs. That is not a good sign for the region, because when you look at Turkish foreign policy over the last 10, 15 years, it is expansionist. It supports the Muslim Brotherhood. It supports a lot of terrorist organizations around the world, whether it's in Palestinian territories, in Somalia, in Jordan, in Egypt, in many other places. They're up to no good, and that is a concern, because we could find ourselves in a situation where Turkey, a NATO member, could be within tactical distances of Israel, and that wouldn't be a good thing.
What's the likely outcome in terms of a provisional government? And how deeply tied are they to either ISIS or Al-Qaeda or You mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. There's so many different forces at play here. Do you have a prediction as to who's going to win?
Well, there definitely is an alphabet soup of acronyms and names of organizations. It's a very dynamic and splintered issue here. Rebels in the south are different from those in the north and those in the east. The bottom line is, as the excellent story by your reporter says, it is HTS that are the dominant organization supported by Turkey. And what I'm happy to see is that, and as President Biden said, it seems as if they're playing nice and if they've implemented lessons from their failures in the past, and they are aware of international perceptions, and they do not want to be seen as total crazy jihadists that are taking over and butchering and doing atrocities. What I think we're going to see now, what we may be cautiously optimistic, looks as if these rebels want at least the appearances of a very orderly transition of power. If they announce elections and go for elections and say that in half a year or a year we want elections, then that will be a very positive sign. I think what they're doing now is setting up an interim government where Jaulani, the head of HTS, will be the interim leader. But it looks far more peaceful and less brutal than what I anticipated it to be. And perhaps that's a sign of cautious optimism for the future.
Well, let's hope. Last question. Who's been funding them all this time? It takes a lot of money to keep that kind of force in the field. Who's behind it all?
The same country that we spoke about that is a threat to regional stability, and that is Turkey. Most of the organizations and most of the fighting power, especially those from the north that started this whole revolution, they are funded by Turkey. And then there's other jihadi organizations that, according to information that we have at FDD, are funded by Qatari money, especially those in the southern part of Syria. The Kurdish forces have certain American funding and certain independent sources. So it's really a mix of various organizations. But I would say that the biggest emphasis here is on Turkish money. You know, when we look back at history, Syria was a country that was made into existence by two colonial powers, France and Britain, deciding for that to be, and then they gave them a flag, and it became a country in 1946. What we are seeing now might be the unraveling of that imperialistic design, where different ethnic groups will take different parts of modern Syria and turn it into autonomies. I think that the Kurds in the northeast are definitely vying for that, and perhaps the Druze population in the southwest will try to do the same. And I think that we're in for very interesting times in the coming months and years ahead.
Well, Jonathan, thanks as usual for your tremendous insight, and thanks for joining with us.
Thank you.
Well, in other news, President-elect Trump told NBC's Meet the Press that Ukraine should probably be prepared for less aid from the U.S. when he takes office. CBN's John Jessup recently went to Ukraine for a one-on-one interview with President Zelensky. The president said he's optimistic about working with the Trump administration.
I wanted to ask you, how will negotiating for peace with Trump back in the White House be different than the current relationship?
I think we will be able to understand one another. We did have phone calls, we did have a meeting, and our teams are working together and working more. And we will be looking for all the opportunities to end that war as soon as possible and as just as possible.
Well, you can watch John's in-depth interview with President Zelensky on tomorrow's 700 Club. You can see the full interview on our CBN News digital platforms.